What's going on, everyone? I'm Camille here for MLS Digest, here to preview Week 6 of MLS action. It's coming your way March 29th and 30th. With international break being over, many players are expected to come back for their teams, so we shouldn't be too worried about too much squad rotation like we saw in Week 5. Since the international break wrapped up Tuesday, that should give everyone enough time to return to their teams for Saturdays and Sundays matches. So we'll get into everything you need to know with injuries, player statuses, and what to expect from all 15 matchups this weekend. Before we do, please make sure to drop a like down below on this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really helps support the channel's growth. Saturday's first match is between the New England Revolution and the New York Red Bulls. The Revs had Week 5 off alongside Miami, so they're coming in a little bit fresher. They had a couple players out on international break, including Yusuf, the defensive mid, and Ganago, one of their new signings, mostly been playing on the left-hand side. And for the Red Bulls, last time out, they won against Toronto due to a Forsberg brace, so they're coming off a win at home. But for the Revs, obviously, only just one goal so far this season, and it was an own goal at NYCFC. The attack has been absolutely putrid, and Caleb Porter's seat continues to get hotter. And Campagna, he's been dealing with an issue. He could be maybe returning in some fashion, just get some minutes under him finally after an injury picked up a couple weeks back, but probably also more doubtful than anything else to actually, play a big part in this one. So, the striker they traded for still injured here. Carles Hill picked up some sort of precautionary type of injury that kept him out of practice earlier this week. And, other than that, it's more of the same for the Revs. You can't really expect them to, come out any different than they have recently. Also considering those key injuries, especially if Carles Hill, is being limited in some fashion, that also hurts this attack. It's kind of hard to not overstate how bad that is. And so for the Red Bulls as well, they're kind of thin a little bit. They will be getting players back from the international break, like Coronel, the keeper, one of their wingbacks, Valencia, but then also Carballo from last game out against Toronto got a red card, so he'll be missing in midfield. But they're also very thin on attack. It's been Forsberg carrying the load, especially last week with the 2 goals, and then it's really just been Choupo-Moting and Julian Hall kind of getting a little bit of run with Sofo, who scored a couple games ago, also out at the same time. So attacking wise, it's very thin, but they're still getting the job done. The quality showing in terms of the DP production. But this one's expected to be one of the uglier games of the weekend, just between the quality of what's on the field, and also a lot of games are going to be kind of not rained out, but very, very ugly in terms of how much rain's going to be going, and just expect a sloppy game here. And so even though the Revs have been, hard to watch offensively, defensively, they've been pretty respectable, and the Red Bulls really haven't found any success outside some bits of Forsberg magic and a couple penalties in their past couple of games. And so I think the Revs can hold up and at least get a point in this one, and I'm going to say 1-1. Moving on, it's an all-Canadian matchup with Toronto FC hosting the Whitecaps. Toronto lost to Red Bulls last time out, like we mentioned. Meanwhile, the Whitecaps finally got done with their perfect start to the season to the Fire, losing 3-1 at home, but it was a bit of an asterisk in terms of the way that came about because so many teams were impacted by the international break, and the Whitecaps lost about 3 or 4 solid starters, especially in that midfield, due to the international break, with Cubas, Vite, Ahmed, Brian White, and then also Ryan Gold, who's been injured for a couple weeks now. That's a lot to ask of this team to still, perform up to that same level that they have been to start this season. And so you kind of have to throw that aside because it's basically on MLS for still scheduling these games, not, adapting to and being coordinated with the rest of the world and playing through the international break. So that's really not a knock on the Whitecaps for losing last week. Those kind of results will just kind of come because of the way this league is scheduled. But now, basically, all of those players that I mentioned will obviously be expected to return. Ryan Gauld's still basically the only player outside of that. So you're getting your top striker back in Brian White. And for Toronto, they were missing Osorio and Spicer, I believe, on international break. And then also, Flores. But also Richie Larea, one of their defenders or kind of left mid, left back, has been dealing with his own injury for a couple of weeks. He went to go, kind of check up on that in the meantime during the international break. So we'll see if he's able to get any time back. But regardless, we also saw finally Insigne get his first minutes for this team this season because he was kind of out of favor with the new coach. And, to see him get minutes is, I guess, a good sign for this team because despite it being a terrible contract, he is your main DP outside of Bernadeschi. But really, Toronto is going to be one of those bottom feeder teams this league regardless because Insigne will not be a consistent starter every week. That's just what we've seen from him, so there's no reason to expect any different. And yeah, this is only their second home game of the season. The tensions will be there because of the nature of these two teams being rivals, but it's hard not to see the Whitecaps just bouncing back immediately. But they do also have that look-ahead spot against Pumas in midweek. They'll be playing them Wednesday following this match to start the first leg of CONCACAF Champions Cup quarterfinals. So we'll see if they rotate even whatsoever, but I think they should be fine considering they will be playing that one at home immediately following this one. So I think they'll be fine here, even if they maybe were missing a couple of those same players due to just rest in preparation for that midweek match. I think they still get by Toronto, and I'm going to say this one ends 2-0 for the Whitecaps. Next up, it's a cross-conference matchup between the Rapids and Charlotte, and this is not a matchup you see very often whatsoever. This has only happened twice before since Charlotte came into the league. They didn't meet last year either in the meantime, and for the Rapids, finally the end of their unbeaten start to the season, losing 3-0 at home to the Timbers, and Charlotte continuing its home dominance, now 3-0 at home with another emphatic win against San Jose 4-1. But they have to travel here where they've been admittedly very, very poor up considering their standards. And that's kind of been the case for this club under Dean Smith even last year. On the road, they just kind of fall a bit of a level, which could be said for really any MLS team. But so far, they've come from behind. Admittedly, I will give them the credit for that against the Sounders in that opening week 2-2, but they didn't really perform all that well. I don't think the performance was deserving of that result. And then also against 10-man Miami, really struggled to unlock that Miami kind of low block, and then couldn't get any type of result against 10 men. So still winless on the road. And for Colorado, Zach Steffen will be returning, which will be a huge boost for them. One of the best keepers this season so far. And for Charlotte, Privet got a red card last game, even though they were up by a lot. He got a red card late in that game. So that's one of your center backs out. But Tim Ream will be coming back amongst Abada and Ajiming as well from the international break. So Ream is going to slot into that center back spot with someone else slotting into that kind of left back role that he's usually been playing for Charlotte. So I don't think this defense really misses too much of a beat, even though Privet is suspended for this one. But it's hard to trust Charlotte at the same time on the road to really be as dominant. And I just don't see either side separating themselves in this one. Rapids will have that home advantage with the altitude. But right now, I think that the result recently was a little bit deflating for the Rapids. I don't think they played a terrible game. They got a very unlucky own goal for that first goal right before halftime. And then the Timbers have just kind of been their bogey team recently, really just piling on the L's against the Rapids. And just kind of ran away with it in the end once they got into a little bit of open space and some countering. That's kind of where the Timbers thrive best. So maybe kind of put that one away for the Rapids as well. Maybe a little bit unlucky, but at the same time, the results have just been too inconsistent a little bit. They still haven't won at home either, the Rapids. Meanwhile, Charlotte hasn't won on the road. And I just think it's going to be neck and neck, and I'm going to call this one a 1-1 draw. We move on to the main night slate, which starts with Atlanta hosting NYCFC. And Atlanta did pretty well considering all the players they had out during the international break to get a 2-2 draw and come back against Cincinnati on the road. Meanwhile, NYCFC went on the road and played out to a very dull 0-0 draw at the Crew. But considering the opponent, it's a pretty good point. But NYCFC was missing only really Alonso Martinez due to the break. And the Crew were missing a couple of defenders. So, maybe could have done more there. They have really consistently picked up points against the Crew as well. But for this one, Atlanta's getting all these players back, such as Stian Gregerson, Sleesh, Miguel Almiron, key players for this team that still survived, obviously, like I said, without them last week. You also have a couple of injuries they're dealing with. Muyumba got injured last game. He's going to be out for about 3 weeks. It's expected, so that's another kind of depth option in that midfield eliminated for the time being and that also might have another effect because Click also hasn't been the most healthy player. He only played 10 minutes last game, so Sleesh has really been carrying the load alongside Fortune. And, with Muyumba, he's been a pretty regular starter so far. So we're going to see a new look kind of midfield. But this defense is slowly getting, finally to first choice fully. And so it's another big test. NYCFC really hasn't been all that dominant, especially on the road so far this season. Yes, 2 draws out of 3 road games. But, you consider the fact that they were up against 10 men Miami and then could have taken all 3 points and then drew. Couldn't score at LAFC, couldn't score at the Crew. I think Atlanta, this could be one where they finally pick things up because obviously you could see just one win through 5 games for this attacking talent is just not what they expected whatsoever. But with all these players returning, I think this is probably, outside of Montreal, the other 2 opponents between them at home, probably their easiest opponent so far at home. And NYCFC also missing a key player in Keaton Parks. He got injured last game. He's kind of a big part of that, midfield, that defensive side of the midfield. And so that could be a big miss for them. They're also without Andres Pereira. They've been out without him for a couple of games. So, I think everything's lining up for an Atlanta victory in this one. It may not be the prettiest, but I think they desperately need 3 points. And this is not one where they can afford to once again choke another lead because, yes, they did get the draw at Cincinnati last week, but they also did go up 1-0 in that game and then had to come back from 2-1. And then in their other results, or in that Miami game, went up 1-0 and then lost out on any points whatsoever. So this is one where I think Atlanta will jump out, take the lead, and actually hold out to it this time. But I don't think it's going to be still as sweat-free. I'm going to say Atlanta wins this one 2-1. Next up, it's DC United hosting the Columbus Crew. DC United finally got done with its unbeaten start to the season, losing to Orlando on the road 4-1. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that the best team they played so far this season, by far, gave them their first loss. You see the 4 teams they played before that. Yes, it's still impressive that they were unbeaten up to week 5, but that opposition was not, that's among, outside the Fire, who are looking like world beaters at the moment, at the time, it's kind of their peers that they've been playing, in terms of what most people think is going to be the ultimate end standings at the end of the year. And so they played Orlando, went on the road, got the break speed off them, scored a goal literally in stoppage time to make this one somewhat respectable. And for the Crew, one of 2 unbeaten teams left so far this season alongside Miami, but picking up 3 straight draws coming into this one. Another 0-0 at home in the past 3 weeks, this time against NYCFC. But they're going to be getting players back like Patrick Schulte, Max Arfston, and also a big deal with this lineup is that Steven Moreira is coming back. What I expect him to come back is today he was fully training. Finally, he's been out for a couple of weeks with a quad injury. And so to see him training already today at the time of this recording, Wednesday, leading up to the game, means that he should be back for this one. And he's probably their best all-around defender, not just on a defensive side of the ball, but is so important to what the Crew do in terms of playing out of the back, and he can kind of fill in even other positions and get higher up the pitch as well. So he kind of dictates their tempo and how they like to kind of move the ball around. And so that's a big deal for me in this game as to why I expect the Crew to eventually come out on top. The only real injury issue at the moment is Mo Farsi. He got injured in training with Algeria. No real updates since then on that. He didn't play either of Algeria's World Cup qualifiers during the international break after getting that knock or injury. And so we'll have to see what his status is, probably out for this one, but I think he can definitely be replaced. We saw Herrera last game as well. And so that's where I'm leading with for the first best bet specifically. I'm going with the Crew on the draw no bet. We're getting good value. We're getting the push protection at even odds here. And once again, DC United, it was a very solid start, but they're also top 10 in each category in terms of expected goals and expected goals allowed as well. And once again, I just don't think it's a coincidence that once they start playing these higher echelon teams, specifically in the East as well, because that's what most of their schedule consists of, being in the East, such as Orlando and such as now the Crew, that they will get exposed, and especially that defensive, how weak that defense is, will get exposed. And so I think this is a good bet here to take the Crew with that push protection. I see them winning, but in the case of a draw, you get your money back. But I just don't see the Crew losing outright. I see them still, they've been a tough, nut to crack, and obviously still haven't lost through 5 weeks. And so no Champions Cup as well to worry about since they've been knocked out. And I think this team's going to be more so full strength this week compared to last against NYCFC. And I think Nancy will get this team right. And I just don't see the Crew at least outright losing in this one. They should be able to at least get away with a point against a very inferior DC United side who has largely been relying on Benteke Magic. Miami hosts the Union at home. Miami, just like the Crew that we just mentioned, are one of two teams still yet to lose in this MLS season through 5 weeks. They had a bye in week 5, so didn't play during that international break. Meanwhile, the Union, against all odds, with so many players missing, including Ty Baribo, the top goal scorer so far this season, won against St. Louis at home 1-0, scored an early goal off a corner kick, and then just saw that one out against the St. Louis side that is one of the worst teams in terms of their possession rate. And yeah, really didn't offer St. Louis too many opportunities. And credit to the reserves, or this kind of not full strength team, to still seeing out now a 4th win through 5 weeks. So these are two of the top teams in the East facing off. Miami dealing with some injuries though. Obviously the big deal with Messi, he was supposed to go on the international break with Argentina but got injured right before that. But he was seen training earlier this week, the past couple of days, in some sort of fashion. And so we'll see, because Mascherano has obviously made it a point that not just about Messi, but anyone who's been dealing with injuries, as well as Weigant, Ruiz, and Taylor, the other ones kind of at the moment still dealing with some knocks, that they're going to be ultra cautious considering the fact that they are focusing on Champions Cup. And they do have that quarterfinal starting against LAFC, but for the first leg, they have to travel to LAFC the Wednesday after this weekend's game. And so will they be looking ahead in terms of how they rotate for this one or whatnot? We will have to see. I would consider Messi, honestly, a true 50-50 to even play in this game, maybe get some minutes late. But as for the Union, they're basically going to be fully healthy. You're going to be getting all these players back you would expect that they missed last week. Andre Blake, top goalkeeper, Jean-Jacques, Bueno, Gazdag, Baribo. I mean, everyone's going to be healthy. This lineup that has been lighting it up so far is going to be fully together again, you would have to expect. And, the thing is that Miami's defense at the moment has actually improved drastically since last season, you have to admit. Under Mascherano, they seem just a little bit more organized. Yes, some defenders have some slip ups in the early weeks and whatnot, but right now they're the first team, the best team in terms of expected goals allowed. They're very much limiting teams' chances. Um, they're not playing all that open, and once again, they're probably overperforming some other metrics because of just the players that they have, who they have signed as well, alongside obviously Messi and Suarez. So it's a hard game to call, but I think with Miami looking ahead a little bit, maybe the Union can kind of pounce on that. And this attack, I just don't see either team really, you know, pulling any punches. But I'm gonna say Miami continues this unbeaten start, but I'm gonna say a draw. I'm gonna say 2-2 between Miami and Philly. Moving on, it's the Fire hosting Montreal, and the Fire have won 3 straight road games now, including the top of the league, Vancouver, entering week 5. Gave Vancouver its first loss of the season, first drive points of the season, with another great result on the road, scoring in the first minute, getting equalized on later, but then fully taking control of the match in the second half. And it's now 10 points through 5 games to start the Berhalter era. Meanwhile, Montreal, they kind of go through this every season, but in this year, it's been a bigger effect in terms of the road schedule to start the season. They have 7 road matches to start the season, so this is going to be number 6 of those. And I've kind of harped on this every week. That's just kind of the nature of, also because of where they are. That's kind of part of why they get the schedule to start every season. But 7 in a row is very difficult to deal with. All this travel, and you see now through these first 5 results that it just has not been going well for them. Ever since that Atlanta game where they showed, good moments, they are scoreless in the last 4 weeks, only picking up 1 point through the first 5 games. And that got head coach Courtois fired, even though it's just his second year with this team. And this is truly one of the worst run clubs in the league in terms of spending and the front office support for these coaches to actually go out and spend money on actual DP talent. And this roster is very, very young. And, a lot of people in the MLS space, including myself, just didn't agree with this decision. But Montreal continues to make these boneheaded decisions in terms of what this front office is doing with turning over all these coaches. And I just don't think that it's the right move. I don't think that this is your so-called first game with a new coach bump. I don't think the new coach is going to give this team a bump. It is the assistant coach, or was the assistant coach for this team, that is now the interim head coach right now. But it's really not. It was never fully, at least, on Courtois. It's this front office. You could say the same thing with the Union and how the Jim Curtin situation went. It's just mind-blowing that the front office continues to place blame in other areas. And so I just don't personally see this changing for Montreal. They're going to continue to be one of the minnows in this league as long as this ownership is still, in place. And so that's where I'm going with the second best bet. I'm going with the Fire to win in this one and over 1.5. There is a little bit of rain expected, but nothing crazy. And this is only the Fire's second home game through week 6 now. And after this long road trip, they're also going to get back Brian Gutierrez, who missed last weekend on international duty, even though he didn't even feature in those games. He's going to be back for this one. And that's really the only guy who left for the international break. So still dealing with some issues with Kellen Acosta, probably missing this week once again. But Orihel and the other guys who have been filling in have just been doing such a phenomenal job. Orihel continues to grow week by week. As a Fire fan, I watch this team every week, and so I can see this improvement week by week, and they're just simply, this attack is clicking. Zinkernagel finally scoring his first goal, and Haile Selassie coming back as another option on that right-hand side, a depth kind of piece, a very young, talented player who finally has now gotten a couple of appearances under him off the bench. And so you could really mix and match with this attack, but especially with Gutierrez back, that obviously unlocks this whole transition attack, which they love to get out into open space. And once again, I just see Montreal struggles continuing. It's hard to really trust a team who hasn't scored in 4 weeks, and a situation where the coach was definitely not in the wrong, and I don't think these players are going to automatically just spark up another emotional level. I just don't think it's that type of situation. Next up, it's Dallas hosting Kansas City. Dallas went on the road and turned its form around with a win against RSL through a penalty from Acosta, or sorry, not a penalty. He missed the penalty, and then he actually redeemed himself later on, right before the first half ended. And then they were able to hold on to that win against a 10-man RSL who went down to a red card due to Piol, one of the striker options, getting an early red. Meanwhile, Kansas City couldn't build off its momentum in that 3-3 draw, where they came back from 3-0 against Minnesota and lost 2-0 at home the following week, last week, to LAFC. And you can see that they didn't build off that. It's not really a team to trust for results so far. And I think now it's, from what I can remember seeing, it's about 12 or 13 wins dating back to games dating back to last season since Kansas City picked up a victory. And so Dallas, you would have to back them in this one. I mean, they're at home. Kansas City's just hasn't been even consistently bad. They've been consistently bad, and Dallas will be getting back Paish for this one, the goalkeeper, one of the best in MLS once again. And also dealing with potentially Anderson Julio finally coming back after a couple of games out, because he went to deal with his green card situation during the international break. So you would hope he would have that figured out by now, but really no update on that. But regardless, they got by last week without him. You still have Pedrinho there, and so you have other options. And so for this third best bet, I'm going with Dallas and Kansas City in this game for over 3, the flat line, plus 107. This is kind of a similar situation as the one we took last week, or I took last week with Orlando facing DC on the over 3. I did expect the home team, just like this situation, to carry the load in this one. Can maybe even get the 3 themselves to at least, get us the push. But at the same time, the defense has been leaky, and even to a team as bad as last week DC and this week now Kansas City can concede. And when we've seen that at home, Dallas has actually been a reverse of last season. Last season, they only had, I think, 1 win away. And this season so far, they've gotten 7 points out of 3 away games. Meanwhile, at home, they haven't picked up a point. They've lost both games, giving up 3 to the Fire and then losing to Vancouver. And so they haven't gotten their result yet at home. I think they do get it in this one. But at the same time, it could definitely be a little bit back and forth. Can't really trust them to hold a clean sheet most weeks. And they've only done it just once last week on the road to RSL because they had 10 men. And so Dallas, top 10 as well in expected goals. And Sporting Kansas City on the flip side, bottom 10 in expected goals allowed. And so I think it's all working out for a Dallas win here, but Kansas City as well can, be a partner for this one, can help out. And I like the price here. We're getting the push protection. I think 3 should be definitely attainable. And there should be no weather concerns. It's not going to really be hot or whatever, as it usually is. Once we actually get into the summer months, where this home field for Texas clubs becomes an actual advantage because of that heat, it's still going to be a pretty nice temperature. More so kind of what KC is used to. And so even though they put in a random showing every week, Kansas City, I still like this team to potentially, give Dallas a run for its money, because we've seen Dallas kind of fall under that pressure maybe a little bit at home in terms of pulling out the result. But scoring-wise, it's been pretty back and forth in most of their games. And so we're going with the over 3. I think Dallas wins this one probably like 3-1 or something like that. But that's where our third best bet is going to go. Next up, it's a rematch of last year's Western Conference first round series, in which Minnesota upset RSL 2-0, both games being won on penalties. And Minnesota hosts RSL in this one. Minnesota, once again, back-to-back weeks where they've choked the lead. Obviously, the horrendous one, 3-0 up at KC to draw. And then this past week, 2-1 up late against Galaxy. Got a very late so-called or thought winner, and then gave up a goal in the few minutes remaining. And so it's back-to-back draws now for Minnesota. Meanwhile, RSL losing at home to Dallas, like we just talked about, went down to 10 men early, and also without Diego Luna, the main star on the team, being gone for the national break. Just couldn't work their way back. Definitely got more pressure in the final minutes as Dallas was trying to just hold on for dear life and maybe nag a goal on the counter. But regardless, we've seen RSL really struggle for goals this season if Diego Luna hasn't been involved. So the big thing with this game is that the weather report is expected to be absolutely terrible. I'm not going to say that it could get postponed because this is in Minnesota and they've played in a lot of snow games, but the weather is expected to be raining all day, some pretty consistent rain, 100% chance of rain all day, as well as a mix of rain and snow in the evening, also 100%. And so by the time this game kicks off, these conditions are going to be very, very sloppy. And, RSL already is very kind of struggling for offense. Yes, they will be getting Diego Luna back. But also Minnesota is a top 5 team in terms of their expected goals allowed, how much they limit teams just due to the nature of their formation and setup. And yes, obviously I know they choked a 3-0 lead, but that was and just what I just mentioned, I get it. The past couple of weeks choking these leads late, and that composure, I guess. But statistically though, and just naturally because of this formation and the way they absorb pressure most of the time very well, against an RSL side that's probably going to have more of the ball regardless of the conditions. I just don't see this RSL attack being able to do enough to unlock this Minnesota defense on that side of things, as well as the fact that Piol's out with that red card, who I think has been the more dynamic of the two strikers between him and Ajago. And Minnesota as well, despite the fact they're getting all these players back from the break, still, this is going to be a very sloppy game. And Dotson as well suffered a knee injury last time out. He's going to be out for months on end. Who knows, with a meniscus injury. So, it's just hard to see this one really being all that exciting. It was the same thing when these two teams met in normal conditions or whatever in both games in the best of 3. It was, I think, 2 0-0s or like a 0-0 and a 1-1 if memory serves me right. And so that's where I'm heading with this fourth best bet. We're taking the under 2.75, so we're splitting it. So if it goes under 2.5, if there's 2 or less goals, then we get the full win. If there's exactly 3 goals, we only get a half loss. And obviously if there's more than 3, we fully lose. But this is a good odds, and we get some good protection on this one. And yeah, I just don't see this with the weather. I just think it's going to be a very sloppy game and shouldn't really expect anyone to shine too much. And especially with RSL most likely possessing more of the ball, just naturally because of the way these two teams set up, it shouldn't be there shouldn't be too much action. The ball won't be moving around too well, and still probably have the edge to Minnesota. But honestly, this might be the ugliest game of the weekend. I'm personally calling this one 0-0. But that's where we're going with the fourth best bet. Moving on to Nashville hosting Cincinnati. And Nashville has certainly been picking up form with 3 wins on the bounce. Portland at the Union, and most recently adding to Montreal's suffering with another 3-0 win. Meanwhile, Cincinnati kind of inconsistent so far this season on the road. Still not even a point through 2 games. And then last week, conceding a late goal to Atlanta to only tie 2-2 in a game where obviously both teams were missing key pieces. Cincinnati missing Denke, the top striker there. And also Kubo getting injured in that game with some sort of hamstring kind of knock. And he wasn't seen training yesterday on Tuesday. And so his status is up in the air as that kind of second striker in the system. So you might see Baird or Santos again, but Santos looked absolutely horrid. Probably should have been subbed off even before or at half, but played 60 minutes. And really, neither of those two players have really performed all that consistently in their time in Cincinnati. But obviously, Denke coming back from international break makes all the difference in the world and makes that second striker's job easier if that is what they are going to roll out with. But also, you have Matt Miazga potentially coming back finally because he's been training with the second team, I believe, and was warming up and training on the side this week. And so Hadebe as well, one of their other center backs, still dealing with his green card, was supposed to have that dealt with over the international break, as well as dealing with a hamstring injury. So all those statuses are up in the air for Cincinnati, with still not a fully first choice back line. But Nashville as well, you know, this midfield has definitely been a breath of fresh air. But for some reason, I just don't see it being all that easy against Cincinnati. I think this is going to be one that's a little bit tighter. And I think Cincinnati picks up its first road point of the season. I think it might be a little bit less enjoyable of a watch than maybe some of the most recent games between these teams. I'm going to say this one ends 1-1. Moving on to some West Coast action to close out Saturday night slate. The first of these late night matches being the LA Galaxy taking on Orlando City. And the Galaxy still don't have a win to their name in MLS play this season, but coming off back-to-back draws, including a comeback draw against Minnesota, like we mentioned, with that late equalizer. And Orlando now coming off a big win against DC United, but on the road just 1 point through the two games. And having to travel all the way to the West Coast here is never an easy proposition for any Eastern Conference team, or vice versa, West Coast team traveling all the way. It's just not a favorable situation. And even though the Galaxy, haven't been full strength by any means, haven't looked great, you have to give them some sort of chance in this one against an Orlando City team that has been absolute fireworks back and forth every week. But Orlando's going to be fully healthy here. Araujo finally came back last week in that midfield to kind of shore things up there after a week off injured. And Gallese is going to be coming back from the international break. But the big story for the Galaxy in this one is that Joseph Paintsil is finally expected to feature in some sort of capacity. Obviously, have to expect probably getting like 20 minutes or something off the bench. But still, if this game is still in the balance by then, he's going to be a very dynamic player in that sense. And we know what he can do from last year in this league. And so that's going to be such a breath of fresh air for this team to finally see one of their top wingers back and actually have that dual threat on the wings with Paintsil and Peck. But Royce is dealing with his own issues. I don't think he's expected to be available for this game. But regardless, LA Galaxy also have the look-ahead spot in Champions Cup midweek. They play Tuesday against Tigres. They host the first leg, so they don't have to worry about traveling, but they do have that limited time off between this game and that midweek game. So they're getting a little bit healthier as they try to continue this Champions Cup run. But against Tigres, obviously, that's going to be a very hard ask to progress through two legs. And this is a tough one to call because Orlando's played a very risky style where honestly most of their games can turn out either or way. And for the most part, they've come out on top. And Christian Ramirez and the Galaxy have kind of been picking up a little bit of steam in the recent weeks. He's scored in back-to-back weeks, been a very good aerial threat. And so this one's hard to call, but I think if this was not such a big travel deal for Orlando and just how much variance their games have, they could win this one. But I'm going to I still think this is probably on the higher scoring end. I think the Galaxy can kind of fix some of their issues against this type of Orlando team and how weak the defense has been. So I'm going to go with a 2-2 draw over in Carson. San Diego hosts LAFC in what is the first edition of what's going to be a new California rivalry. And San Diego still winless at home, but 2 draws against St. Louis and the Crew. And last time out, they finally picked up their first loss after going unbeaten up to week 5 against Austin on Sunday Night Soccer in week 5. LAFC, meanwhile, bounced back from a loss to Austin as well and went on the road and beat, obviously, a very poor KC side, but regardless, did it without the likes of Bawanga and a couple other players such as Giroud. And David Martinez, the young star, is quickly growing into more and more of, more comfortable in this league and earning himself some very good minutes to kind of challenge some other wingers on this team, such as Under, who is finally getting his first couple of starts under him and will obviously be featuring more and more and more for LAFC. But the big deal for San Diego now is that the depth was already tested in the past, several weeks since Chucky Lozano went out early in that match against St. Louis in their home opener. But as well as now the fact that their top striker, Marcus Ingvartsen, is going to be out for about 3 months or so. That's what is expected with a leg injury that kept him out last week and is going to continue to keep him out. And we already saw the effects of that on this San Diego attack last week, where they lost to Austin, and they had a couple of players out as well on the international break with Godoy and one of their center backs, McNair, which got them really caught out and had a couple of balls played in behind, including a very kind of cheeky, well-timed free kick set piece that Austin eventually got the game winner on to make it 2-1. But regardless of those guys returning in midfield and on the back line, it's hard to trust the San Diego attack. The depth is being tested. You're going to have Tomas Angel probably, being the new starting striker with a lot more responsibility on his shoulders. And then you're going to have Dreyer on the right-hand side. And then who fills in on that left wing side in this 4-3-3 system? Alex Mighton or Boateng maybe swapping here and there. It's not very convincing. Tomas Angel really hasn't had too many consistent starts under his belt outside of the last couple of weeks with Ingvartsen dealing with his injuries. And so can he shoulder that load? I don't know. This midfield is still obviously very elite in terms of ball possession and, keeping things calm. But I think this team is going to be getting very, very frustrated when it comes to trying to create chances at home with this home crowd kind of egging them on and trying to force them into finally, trying to get this first win at home. But I think they're going to be frustrated because this LAFC team is one of the teams with the least possession. They love to absorb pressure, and they're going to stick to that type of style, and they're going to frustrate the San Diego team. And that's kind of where I'm headed with this fifth best bet. We're going with LAFC draw no bet. We're getting that push protection. LAFC obviously back-to-back weeks with the road games, and they have the look-ahead spot where they host Miami on Wednesday after this in Champions Cup first leg. So maybe a little bit of a look ahead. But I think this situation lines us up to where LAFC can really make things frustrating for San Diego, who is very limited in attack right now. And Bawanga is going to be coming back from international break. Martinez, like I mentioned, and Under are getting their feet under them. And whether or not Giroud returns from his little, France trip and dealing with a leg injury as well, Abobasi will probably start once again. And, maybe they won't have a lot of the ball, but they simply do not need it in many cases. They usually take their chances and are killers on the break. And so I think this is one where maybe it's a little bit lower scoring, but I just really don't see this LAFC defense really having too much trouble with what remains of a very limited San Diego attack. To close out Saturday's slate of matches, it's the Earthquakes taking on the Sounders, and after 2 weeks of a honeymoon phase with Bruce Arena, it's 3 weeks in a row now with losses for San Jose, And the Sounders as well, dealing with their own issues. Yes, they drew to Houston at home last week. Another 0-0 result against this team going back to the playoffs and just recent history. But the Sounders, like we've talked about, dealing with so many injuries now with Paul Arriola out for the season, De La Vega and Jordan Morris out for weeks on end. And, Jesus Ferreira has to lead the line now with, Rothrock and a couple other options there that should still be a decent enough side. But it's hard to really call this one. I think it's going to be pretty evenly contested with the Earthquakes at home as well. The Earthquakes are actually number one in terms of expected goals allowed so far. So statistically, the games have been very open. The goalkeeping has been, much better compared to last season. But for the Sounders as well, it's hard to really expect this team to be too on top of things early in the season. We've seen this time and time again, season after season, where they just start a little bit slow. Maybe once these injuries, the injury situation picks back up again, they'll probably run the table almost in that sense, especially with how good their home form is. But being that they're away, and all this lineup, kind of nonsense in a sense, because Schmetzer still really is tinkering with the lineup and has to continue to because of who's out. I just don't see either team really taking this game, and I think it's going to be a little more on the low scoring end. I'm going to go with a 1-1 draw, and the Quakes specifically definitely need this one to turn things around a little bit. To start Sunday's slate, St. Louis hosts Austin. And before we get into anything else in this game, I have to talk about the fact that there will be very much rain in this one, and very good likelihood of what's now on the weather report, severe thunderstorms. So we could see this match potentially getting postponed or pushed maybe a little bit further. Who knows? But at the moment, it seems like this could be a situation where something like that happens. But regardless, if this match were to be played regardless, there's going to be rain. It's going to be maybe a little bit sloppy. And St. Louis coming off a pretty bad loss on the road to the Union, a Union team that was without 5 solid starters from back to front. And early on in the match, Lowen picks up a bad red card, and they have to play down a man, down a goal for at least an hour. And they couldn't get the ball. This team is, I think, second to last in possession rate so far. Melberg said it's been a key thing in terms of improving on that number even after this win at Seattle. But the players in the system, even Lowen, who, regardless of the red card or not, in the past weeks, just hasn't been that same version of himself in terms of progressing the ball. And this midfield and between the midfield and the center backs literally just cannot keep the ball when they win it back. And Austin, on the other end, it's back-to-back wins now at LAFC against San Diego on Sunday Night Soccer at home. They do have to travel for this one, but they're definitely the more confident team at the moment. They're going to be basically fully healthy because Conte has returned from his kind of slight injury in the past week. He got a little bit of run, so he could be maybe in line to start once again. But regardless, it's really only Dessler, the right back, that's been out and will be out for at least another month. And so Uzuni is going to come back from international break. And where I'm going with this best bet is Austin on the draw no bet. We're getting really good odds here at plus 140. And so we're getting that push protection again. It's yet another road team that I'm backing on the draw no bet, but it's good push protection for these road teams because of the fact that they are on the road. But I think these are good situations for them, including this one where Lewin's going to be out with that red card. He's going to be suspended. And St. Louis, regardless, like I've talked about, yes, they've been defensively solid. Both these teams have been, but they can't retain the ball. And Austin is actually not really any better. They're third worst in terms of possession rate. But I think even against a team like St. Louis, even though they will be at home, Austin will probably have more of the ball. And it's just going to be a really rough game. Probably an ugly game that probably could also lean towards the under, but I think Austin has the far better quality at the moment, and St. Louis really doesn't know what it is. And without Lewin, who I still think is probably the best midfielder there out of the bunch, I'm just not sure Melberg is really set yet on what midfield to run, what formation to put out there, and how to really fix this, immediately. And so I think St. Louis is still going to be struggling. They've struggled for goals outside of that Galaxy game. Just one goal in the 4 games outside of that. And even if Austin does have the ball and St. Louis maybe does get on the break in some moments, I just don't think they have that same level of pace. And especially if you put Klaus up there, you're definitely, sacrificing pace up top. So you're going to see probably St. Louis out of the two probably sitting more in and, getting peppered with crosses and whatnot, which Austin loves to do. And, it could be, this could be a riskier one to bank on, considering that really both of these teams' games have been either or. We're only one game between these two teams combined. 10 games has seen both the scores. So you're really kind of banking on, or I am, things really bouncing your way. But I think Austin has a clear advantage of the two teams at the moment. St. Louis is a little just bit more unsure of what it is right now. And without Lowen as well, and some other players who could maybe slot in and kind of change this system week to week, still kind of getting back into kind of full fitness. They're not really there yet to start. I think St. Louis's struggles in that regard are going to continue. Austin, the healthier team, and actually have their top goalie outside instead of St. Louis, who will be continuing to miss Berkey. So I think with this push protection, the odds, yes, the game might be sloppy if it is not even rained out or stormed out, but that's where I'm going with for this final best bet. And finally, Sunday Night Soccer this week is between the Timbers and the Dynamo. The Timbers went on the road, got a big win against the Rapids, absolutely blowing the doors off them, which they've just continuously been able to do the past couple of seasons, specifically against the Rapids. And the Dynamo got a second 0-0 draw in consecutive road games 3 weeks ago against the Crew and now recently against Seattle. And they had a couple players out on the break, including McGlynn, one of the new midfielders they traded for, but still, they have yet to score multiple goals in a game this season. And on the road, it's been 2-0. So this is another road game for them. The Timbers definitely have far more momentum. Will Jonathan Rodriguez finally return? He's been kind of creeping his way back, but I don't think there's a solid enough update yet to convince me that he's going to feature in any form yet in this game. But regardless, it was good to see Kelsey get on the score sheet for the Timbers finally. And a couple other players, just gaining that better chemistry. So also Houston dealing with a bit of a problem in their goalkeeping room. Third string keeper going to be playing in this one after Maurer went down last game with his own injury, and then Tarbell also injured the game before that with an ACL injury. So you're going to be seeing Blake Gillingham as this third string now goalkeeper, the only fit goalkeeper in this squad, and a defense that's a little bit shakier than last season, an attack that's absolutely almost non-existent outside of some service into Paintsil if they can get it. Even though the Timbers have their own defensive issues, Araujo dealing with getting his green card during the break. Who knows if he's done that? I haven't really seen anything, an update on that. I still think the Timbers attack will do just enough in this one and test that keeper. They have to kind of make that an emphasis and just simply get shots on target. And so for this Sunday Night Soccer, I think it's going to continue that kind of reversal of what we saw early in the season, where I think we saw the first 3 or 4 weeks of away teams winning, and Austin won last week. I think the Timbers get it done on Sunday Night Soccer. I'm going to call this one 2-1. Thanks for checking out the video, everyone. Let me know what your favorite matchups of Week 6 are and what you expect. And make sure, once again, to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you all in the next video.